Hey, beauty, welcome back to the show. Today's about feeling unqualified for what God's put in front of you and going anyway. Gladys Aylward was rejected by a missionary society, went to China on a one-way ticket anyway, and kept going back through trial after trial because serving was the desire of her heart. God stayed with her through it. I learned about Gladys Aylward from our homeschool curriculum that we're doing. We switched to a curriculum called My Father's World. I really love it because it talks all about different cultures and the curriculum is written by missionaries. So we've been learning a lot about missionaries. That's when I came across Gladys Aylward. So as I was saying, Gladys Aylward was rejected by a missionary society. So she cleaned houses to so that she could earn enough money to get on a train to go to China. So right there at the very beginning, she was rejected as a missionary and she didn't give up. When she finally got on a train, it was in the middle of a war. So she was forced off of the train and she ended up in Russia and she had to walk through the bitter cold all night long. She was eventually arrested, put on another train, was almost forced to work in a factory. She was almost raped, but before that happened, she prayed and the man left her room. When I'm reading this, I'm thinking to myself, I would have I would have probably just given up in the middle of winter in Russia. But she keeps going. She finally ends up in China, but she's in the wrong place. She has to travel on a mule. And she finally gets to where she needs to be, but she meets this unfriendly lady missionary who eventually dies. So then Gladys Aylward takes over the lady's inn, but she doesn't have funds to keep the inn going. So of course she prays, and then one day there's a knock on her door. The leader of the village wants her to be a foot inspector. This was back when in China they were still binding women's feet. So back then they thought that women's feet, women were more beautiful if their feet were bound. So what happened was when people were babies, what they did was they would take the baby's toes and bend them all the way to the heel and wrap their feet with bandages so that they would have this odd bound foot, but they thought it was beautiful. And so of course when these girls grow up, they can't really walk right. They just hobble around. But during that time, that was the time when they wanted to stop this tradition. So the leader of that particular village approached Gladys and wanted her to be a foot inspector. They wanted her to go from town to town to ensure that this wasn't happening anymore, that the female babies' feet were not being bound anymore because they wanted to stop the madness. So she becomes a foot inspector and she starts preaching the gospel as she's going from town to town inspecting people's feet. Eventually, people get to know her and know of her amazing character and leadership. So the leader of the village comes to her when there's a prison riot. And think about it. She's this female born in London. They send her into the prison to stop a prison riot. And of course, she doesn't want to do it, but she goes, she prays. They don't attack her or anything. And she improves the environment for the prisoners because it turns out that they were hardly eating anything and that they were extremely bored. So she told the leadership to give them things to do because they were hungry and they were really bored. And so she stopped the prison riot. She stopped prisoners from getting killed. I think it's around this time that she starts adopting children. And it's around this time during World War II when the Japanese were invading China. So there's this other crazy story where Gladys hears the Japanese guards attacking about to attack the women. They're about to force the women to, if you have children, you might want to turn this off. They're about to force the women to take off their clothes. Gladys runs into the building. Inside the building are a bunch of Chinese women and Japanese soldiers, and also two other missionaries. And right before the missionary, not Gladys, but right before the missionary gets attacked, gets hit on the head with a gun, he starts yelling out, "Get on your knees and pray! Get on your knees and pray!" The women start doing this, and then the soldiers freak out and they leave. But this is when Gladys gets hit by a rifle and she becomes unconscious for I'm not sure how long. So the Japanese are invading this village, and it gets to the point where the villagers go and hide in a cave. And by this time, Gladys has accumulated 94 children. She's basically adopted 94 kids, and it gets to the point where they need to evacuate the village. So she takes these 94 kids. She puts millet. She carries millet on her back, I guess. And some of the kids are really young. Some of them are, I think, 4 years and younger. And these 4-year-olds have to carry their own bedrolls. So this one woman takes 94 women across the mountains of China. She, I don't know how she fed all of them. She brought millet, and then sometimes she just picked herbs and made tea or something. She takes them across the mountains. The journey lasts, I think, about 2 weeks. They eventually end up on a train. At the end of all this, she ends up in a coma. But when they finally get to their destination, none of the kids have gotten sick and none of them have died. Also, I forgot to say, in the middle of their journey, they have to hide because the Japanese are bombing the countryside. So at when they finally get to where they need to go, as I said, she ends up in a coma, but she survives. The missionaries end up sending her back to, I think they send her back to London or somewhere in Europe. She recovers, but she's still really weak. But instead of resting and staying where she wants to go back to China, but she ends up in Taiwan, still serving as a missionary. Throughout this whole time, she must have been scared. She must have been sad. I think also I left out the part where at one point she witnessed children getting their heads chopped off because they wouldn't deny Christ. She went through trial after trial after trial, and yet at the end, she still wanted to go back to Taiwan and serve God. It just made me think about how I just really take for granted everything that I have in my life. And when I go through trials, they're not like the trials that Gladys Aylward went through. And it's not that I want to minimize my trials or your trials, but it makes me realize that God does bring us through things that we never would expect or think that we could handle. And the truth is, we can't handle these trials alone. It was God that brings us through these trials. And when I look at her life, God protected her from being raped. God protected those women in that building. He protected those 94 children who were really hungry and their feet must have been all torn up. He protected those 94 children on that 2-week journey. God doesn't promise that we won't go through trials. In fact, he says that we'll go through trials. But the comforting thing is that God goes with us through those trials. This verse, I've been meditating on this verse for the past, I don't know, past month or a couple months, Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So that's one thing that we get to hold on to. God goes with us wherever we go. I also have been thinking about Psalm 37:4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Gladys Aylward was rejected by a missionary society. She was told that she would never go to China, but instead of giving up, she cleaned houses until she earned enough money. She went through trial after trial before even reaching China. And then after reaching China, it just got harder and harder. She was in a war zone. She led 94 kids through the mountains. After she was in a coma and she was back in Europe for a little while, she still went back to Taiwan. She could have given up over and over and over again. But I do believe that God placed a desire in her heart to serve the people that she was called to serve. And so that's another beautiful promise that when we delight in the Lord, He gives us the desires of our heart. It might not look like what we thought it would look like or hoped it would look like, but Gladys Aylward never gave up. And I believe it's because she loved God and also because it, everything that she went through, even though it was so hard, that was her desire. It was her desire to serve the people of China and then Taiwan. So I just want you to be encouraged today. If you're going through trial after trial after trial, and the trials are more than you ever thought you could handle, I just want to remind you that God is with you through your trials. And I want you to remember that God sees your desires. He cares about them. And when we delight in God, His desires become our desires. We never have to be worried that God is withholding something from us or that we are missing out on something because God knows what's best for us. If He's withholding something, it's for our good. Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. I hope that this was encouraging to you today. I hope that you were encouraged by Gladys Aylward's story. In my book, she is definitely one of the heroes of the faith. I was telling my husband that after reading her story, it just encouraged me because it made me realize that I can too do hard things because of God. And my hard things are probably minuscule hard things compared to what Gladys Aylward went through. Thanks for listening today. If you're a Christian woman who's exhausted, maybe you feel dismissed by conventional medicine and you're ready to get to the root cause instead of just managing symptoms, I'd love to talk with you. I'm an RN with a background inside the pharmaceutical industry, and I help women through a whole person, faith rooted approach. I am currently offering a free 15-minute introductory call, so if you're interested in chatting with me to see if you might want to work with me, go to herholistichealing.com/call to book your free 15-minute introductory call. If you're interested, I encourage you to do that as soon as possible because I do not know how long I will be offering these calls. I will talk to you soon.